Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. On today's tutorial, I'm going to do another Northern Lights scene. I did one last week, really enjoyed that one. It was quite minimal, we just had a mountain scene. This time we're going to do more of a forest and snow along with the Northern Lights in the sky. Really think the colours are vibrant and beautiful, so yeah, I feel inspired to do it again. If you want to follow along, I've got open an A4 canvas within Procreate on the iPad. I've pre-selected some colours, which are here. If you want to use these exact colours, then you can get the codes down in the video description, and there's also a link that takes you to my Patreon page and you can download the colour file there for free. If you're using the codes, just go to the value section, type them in one at a time, press enter, the colour appears up here and you can tap them to create your own. In terms of the brushes I'm going to be using within airbrushing the soft brush and the medium brush, and also within the artistic brushes I'm going to use the hearts brush as well. If you do follow along and you're pleased with your results, make sure to share them with me. You can share them either by tagging me on Instagram, and the link for that is down in the description. Or if you want to join our Facebook group, there is a link down in the description for that. And you can get feedback from me and all the other artists there too. Okay, with all that being said, let's get started. So we have the A4 canvas on layer 1. I'm going to go to my colours, the top first colour, and we're just going to drag it to flood the canvas like that. Then we're going to create another layer. And we're going to create some stars now. Now, this is pretty much the same technique that I showed you in the previous tutorial, but I'll just run through it again. So we go to the brushes. I'm going to put it on the airbrushing and the medium brush. It is important that you put this on, or you have your settings set to palm rejection, because I recommend that you lean your palm on the screen when you're doing the stars. Go to the colors. I'm going to use these 4 different colors. Now, the reason I'm not just white is because when you use just white for something like stars, I think it just looks a bit flat and a bit uninteresting. So we've got some warm tones and some cool tones. So we start with the cool one, and you can see it there, but I'm going to put it up to 100%, but I'm going to put it down to 1% size. And I'm just going to start in the top corner. I'm just going to place a few points. Don't need to go too much with these because the actual brightness of the sky is going to obscure some of the finer points. It doesn't really matter too much. Just do a few, and occasionally you just want a really pop out one to make it a bit stronger. Maybe alternate with your colours. We'll go to the warm one. It's not going to be too noticeably different, but it just stops it being quite as flat. So I'm using difference in pencil pressure, so sometimes I'm pressing super light, so when you can zoom in you can see the points are there, but when you zoom out you barely notice them, so that is what I recommend. So occasionally press on a lot, and much of the time just press on lightly. Try to keep them randomly spaced as well. You don't want them evenly spaced apart too much because it will look a little bit artificial. We can go to the brighter colours, we can go to the whites. Just throw in occasional ones of those, maybe that's too bright. You want to keep the white bits relatively small but bright. Actually enjoy the other colours a little bit more. I think they're a bit better looking. We'll go back to the warm and cool colours there. We're just aiming for this top section, and then we can copy that and paste it to other areas. Again, back to the cool colour. 1 or 2 can just stand out a little bit more. Okay, so that will do for the basic. If we go to the layer that it's on, layer 2, we duplicate the layer by sliding and pressing duplicate. We can then go to the transform tool, maybe flip it vertically and horizontally because we want to avoid creating obvious patterns and duplications. We'll just move that to create another section. Maybe merge them together, which is quite tricky when you're pinching. There, I just did it. Duplicate those 2, move it further along, about there. Again, merge these 2. If you're having trouble with a pinch, just tap on the layer, merge down, duplicate, go back to the layer, and just bring it down again. Now I'm not going to take it any further than that. I think I will flip it horizontally, but that will do. Now if I want to go back in manually later on and just bring out a couple of highlight stars, then I can do that. But I'm just going to merge them together again. So all the stars now are on one layer, and that's great. So we're going to create another layer. So on layer 3, we're going to go to our second colour. We're going to go to the soft brush this time, and we're going to put it up to about 15% and about 80% opacity. And just below the halfway point, I'm going to do this a few times. We'll bring it all the way down to the bottom of the canvas, in fact. And just a nudge above, so about 2/3 of the way up is probably enough. Then we're going to go to the adjustments, we're going to go to the Gaussian blur, we're going to slide it across to about the 80%. Now it's important that this was an above layer because you can see now those stars are starting to disappear and go behind that nice green warm colour. So that's perfect for the effect that we're trying to create. So we're going to create another layer now. Go back to our colours. So we've used all the colours on the top. Not to say we won't return to them, but for now they're done. We're going to go to the first colour on the second row. Go to our brushes, choose the medium brush this time. Turn it considerably down to about 5% size, and we'll keep it on about 90% opacity. So with this colour, I'm just going to draw something of a horizon line, maybe a bit of a mound on one side, and then I'm just going to allow it to start to complete more of the areas down here. Now I don't mind that it has streaks and stripes. We can use some of that to our advantage, perhaps. So we'll just roughly colour that in, which is one of the reasons I put it at 90%, just because it helps creating some of the texture, some of the things later on. So I'm going to keep it a little bit patchy. I think that's actually quite helpful. I do think I've encroached a little bit too much on the sky, which is something, you know, is easily done. So we'll go to the transform tool and we'll just go to the freeform. We'll just pinch it down a little bit more, just until it takes up a slightly smaller space at the bottom. I think that works better. Next thing, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 5, but I'm going to put it underneath layer 4 this time. I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to go all the way to the colour at the end, which is this black, but I'm going to change the brush this time. So we're going to go to the artistic brushes. We're going to use the hearts, so you can see the texture that it creates, but we're going to turn it down. That's quite a big size brush. So we need it about the 2% size. And again, not full opacity, so about 70% opacity I think will work. And what I want to do is just with a movement left to right, with a point at the top, as you can see, I'll zoom in a little bit, we start to create these tree effects. Now, if you're fairly confident that you can recreate these effects, then just go for it. But I'll show you another way to start it in 1 second. And you can see that these trees now will go behind this horizon point. So another way to start these trees is to go to your airbrushing and the medium brush, turn the medium brush down to about 1%, draw the tree trunk by pressing on lightly and then pressing on a bit more as it goes further down. And then you can switch to your artistic brush, to the hearts brush, and then just a little to the left, a little to the right. And probably drawing the tree trunk is really quite important because we're definitely going to leave some exposed bits of the tree trunk on some of the more foreground trees. So maybe get in the habit of doing this for the background ones as well. So then you're just sort of dancing around left to right with the brush, either side of that tree trunk. Obviously it's going to get a bit broader, a bit wider as it goes further down. Like so. Again, maybe we can go back to the airbrushing, the medium brush. Might be a good idea to get all the tree trunks in first, including some small ones. So we're going to have gaps perhaps where we can see some trees further back, and then maybe we get some clusters here where we get a few together. So we can just move all the way along. Perhaps they're getting slightly smaller and further off into the distance as they come over this area. So they're not completely consistent as they go across. I'm just going to switch backwards and forwards. I'm going to go back to the artistic hearts brush. Maybe some of these are just a little bit skinnier. They don't go quite as broad. Some of these look like a traditional Christmas tree. Some of them could be a little bit thinner. Again, leave some gaps here and there. Maybe some of them could be really much wider, in fact, and quite bushy, and that can work. So slightly more leaning upwards at the top. Maybe you get slightly more on one side even. Sometimes they're not even. They can be quite lopsided. And then as it goes further down, we've just got a general change in the direction. So in some ways it doesn't really matter, especially when you get a cluster. You're not going to notice those kind of details at the end anyway, but it's good practice because we're going to do some foreground trees too, and you will see them there. So maybe in these areas where perhaps you've not got taller trees, you can just have some slightly really low lying. Again, gives the illusion perhaps there's some that are just further in the distance and all you're seeing is just the very top, and that can work too. But then maybe one that's just a little bit closer and you start to see it more. So I'm creating a really nice cluster in this area, and then generally it's going to be a bit more sparse as it moves along. And if you're doing the really distant trees, it might be as well just to turn the brush down a little bit. So you can perhaps just go to the very low end of 2%. It's going to be a little bit smaller and noticeably different. I think if you do all the trees in the background first, you're going to get a little bit more practice creating the shapes that you're happiest with, and then when you do the foreground ones, you just can be a bit more confident. So these are the best place to start. It also sets the scene, so when you do them later on, it feels like they have a context and a place to exist. So as you can see, I'm moving across, and sometimes you don't even need to draw a tree trunk, especially if it's a really denser looking tree. Don't worry about it. And because it's in the distance, if I do a really fine tree trunk now, I've got the brush reduced in size. Doesn't matter which brush you use either. So I'm just using this hearts brush, setting out my tree trunk in the background, and then just, because it's really thin, doesn't matter. It's only really about creating the effect in the distance, so we're not going to worry as much about this and these details. Just get the effect in place. Okay, we're going to create a new layer, but we're going to put it beneath layer 4 and layer 5. So layer 6 now is going to be sandwiched between layers 3 and 5. We're going to use these Northern Light colours. I'd forgotten to put them on at the beginning of the tutorial, but they're there now, so don't worry about it. They're also in the colour codes and the file that you'll download, so that isn't an issue at all. So we're going to go to the first colour, go to our soft brush on this new layer. We're going to have it up to about 8%. And keep it low on the opacity at around 5%. And we're just going to start bringing this in roughly. You don't need to be too precise at this point. It's just creating a wave that's maybe cutting across the sky, and just some anomalies perhaps here at the top as well. So just some waves, some shapes. Don't get bogged down too much at this point. You just try to build in some suggestions that there's some really faint things going on that's just breaking up that background a little bit. And it's really easy, just blur these in. So rather than use the Gaussian blur, I'm going to go to the adjustments and use the motion blur. I think it's just going to help create a slightly more interesting effect. So just slide it across, and you can move up and down as well. So you can have a go, play around. I'm just trying to keep it relatively side to side. So I'm going to put it at around the 40% or so. I'm going to stay on the same layer for now, but I'm going to move to so I'm going to keep that as a background layer. So I'm going to create another layer. Again, it's underneath the tree layer this time. It's really important that it is underneath layer 5, especially for what we're going to add right now. So we're going to go for the second colour, which is quite a toxic looking green, but as a thin vein of intense colour, I think it's going to look really good. So we'll turn it down to about 4% size, keep it on the 5% opacity, and we can just have it starting to poke through, starting over here. And perhaps it just cuts up into the sky a little bit as well. And just go over it a bit more in certain places. Now there is no right and wrong for this. You don't need to copy the exact shapes that I'm showing you. I'm showing you how to build up the effect. So if yours ends up looking in different areas that you're adding these colours, then go for it. At least if you've got the colours and you know where and when roughly to put these effects, then it's going to be hopefully an assistance to you. But you don't need to specifically copy the exact shapes that I'm showing you. Have fun, play with it. So I'm just letting that merge in a little bit more. Perhaps again we'll go to the adjustments, to the motion blur, just blur it in a little bit. Something like that works quite well for me. And I'm going to stay on the same layer, but I'm going to turn it down to 3% size and slightly up on the opacity to 10%. And I'm just going to be a bit more precision based now and just exaggerate that colour where I feel I want to really push it a bit more. So I'm using a combination obviously of the opacity and pencil pressure. Maybe turn the size of the brush up a little bit more in places to 5%, just so it's a bit more softened in. Maybe get a bit more background to these trees as well. Again, let's soften it in a little bit more. Motion blur, just a tweak. I'm I'm going to create another layer. I want to keep everything on different layers. Move along the colour, try this third colour in. So we'll have it on 4% size and 10% opacity. And again, just bring in these colours a little bit. In fact, I'm going to turn the brush size up. Let's be a bit more bold. So 8% size, let's really bring in some more dramatic elements here. Again, I'm just going to soften it in. Motion blur. Okay, I will definitely come back to this and intensify that up, but I just wanted to get a hint of it in the background so that now when I add trees and other elements, then the lighting is going to make a bit more sense. So we're going to go back up to the top layer, create another layer. So on this new layer, we're going to go back to the middle row and I'm going to choose this second colour along now. So I'm going to start adding some suggestions that the light from the sky is actually impacting the surface of the snow here. So I'm going to turn that down to about 2% size and keep it probably about the 10% opacity as well. So you'll see now that it's quite subtle. If I zoom in, you can see that these marks are going to be quite slight, but they're definitely there. So on this layer, I'm just going to start introducing some hints and suggestions that the light is rebounding, reflecting off the surface of the snow that we have here. So I'm keeping it in quite flowing, quite unbroken gestures. You can always increase the size a little bit to about 5%. Let's just block in some more areas. And I'm going to introduce breaks in this as well. So it doesn't matter if you add a bit too much to this, because you can always go back in with another colour or the eraser and just remove sections. Again, alternate between that larger size of 5 and down to the 2%. Create these nice sweeping gestures. Okay, I'm going to start adding some trees. It's important that we get them in at this point so we can create shadows and details around the base of the trees. So I'm going to go to the top layer and create another layer. I'm going to go back to my brushes, select the medium brush. I'm going to have this size of the brush at around 2% again, and probably 100% opacity for this. We're still on the soft brush, and about 90% opacity as well. Go to our colours. We're going to select the black colour. So in terms of the brushes, I'm going to choose the lower end of 2%, 90% on the opacity. Again, all within the medium brush on this new layer. And we're just going to start drawing some trees. So I need to get the tree trunk in there first. So when you're drawing this, it doesn't matter if it has a bit of a wobble, a bit of a lean, it looks more natural that way. Now I haven't made any adjustments to the brushes. So you can see here, it's probably a bit too thick at the top. If that's how you end up, maybe start from the base, get to about halfway, maybe turn the size of the brush down to 1%, and then, you can just go up to the top of your tree and just fine tune it up to a much finer point near the top. Now there are adjustments and different brushes that you can use, no doubt, but I like to keep things really straightforward. So now with the hearts brush, we're going to put the size of the brush up to about 3% and about 80% opacity. And I'm just going to start at the very top. Just create some tufts, left to right. We're not going to get the same general sense of the branches that we did here, but some slightly broken textures. We can always add in some faint little branches to join these tufts to the main section. I am still going left to right. Create some areas where it really bulks together. It's slightly less broken, less fragmented. But then other areas it can be quite sparse and you have a big gap. And like I said before, you can go back in with the airbrushing, medium brush. We're still on that small size. So you can just create a branch that just joins up and connects all of these little tufts to something substantial. Back to the artistic hearts brush. It's okay to have tufts out slightly further away and then not a lot connecting them, because again we can go back in with the medium brush, just create a little branch to connect them up, and we'll proceed that way. But don't stop when you get to this point. It doesn't matter if you obscure the trees that you've already created in the background, that's going to look more natural. So sometimes you have to destroy what you've already created, but that's just the way that it goes. So there could be one tree. We'll go back to the airbrushing and medium brush. So we can go back in, add some branches where necessary. Perhaps don't go too overboard. You don't have to over-explain it. You don't have to do too many branches. Just a hint of it here and there. Gives it a sense that it is more plausible. Okay, so we're still on the same layer, but we're going to create another tree. So I'll keep working across. So the medium brush, I'll turn it back up for the tree trunk, so about 2% at the bottom. And then as it goes further up, we'll just reduce the size of the brush down. I mean, you could just keep it on the 1% if you want to, just go over it. So if we do it at the 1% like we've done here, it gives it nice and fine. As you get further down, just thicken it up. Just be careful not to go too far, like I just did. So I'm going to stay on the 1%, and I'm just going to create a series of other trunks for our scene. So there might be some middle distance that appear to be coming pretty much from just over the other side of that bump. Maybe some other ones that just maybe exaggerate. Create a variety of sizes and textures. So I'm just considering placements initially, and then I can go back in and thicken up the tree trunks as required. So I'm thinking a really substantial one in this area, perhaps have it in just about there. I think that look pretty nice. Then maybe another one here. So I'm going to go back in, turn the brush size up. Let's choose this one, give it a really substantial tree trunk at the bottom. In fact, because it's so close, it's going to go all the way up, isn't it? So once you've got some in place, go back to the artistic brush and the hearts brush, and then I'm just going to show you how I would approach some of them where I'm treating it quite sparsely. So I could even turn the opacity down a little bit, just so they're not quite as bold. So we'll turn it to 60%. I'm not really changing very much. It's still on the 3% size, but I'm now just pressing lightly, and it's a lower opacity. And I'm just creating a sense that perhaps these are not as prominent as they are here. And perhaps this is quite sparsely populated tree as well, so it's not got a lot going on there. So that'll probably do for that particular tree, for example. And I could do a variety of trees in exactly that method of being quite thin. Maybe they have a bit more concentrated foliage at the top. Again, pressing lightly. And then maybe they get a bit thinner near the bottom. Maybe all you do see is just thin branches without really any needles, or it's not really leaves, is it? But without much, anyway, attached to the branches. And another one here, and they're all kind of mushing together there a little bit, and that's absolutely natural. There's a tendency, I think, when you're doing things like this to separate them out so you can see them all clearly, but that's not what you'd get in nature. Things naturally will overlap, so allow it to do that. It's going to look better for it, so don't overthink it. And another one here. Allow some of the tufts to go a bit further away from the actual tree trunk at times. Allow the branches to go a bit wild. Especially if it's a distance one, you don't really need to go in there at all and explain the branches, because they're going to be thin branches, and really the overall hazy effect you're not even going to notice. So I'm just going to move across the canvas now, apply this technique to all my trees. Now the foreground ones, perhaps we could turn the opacity up a little bit, put it back up to like 80% and really create a solid black. So I feel like I've done a really prominent tree there. Perhaps I can just extend the tree trunk just to explain that. That's going to happen. So if you get a bit carried away with the foliage, which I just did, then I'm going to bring the tree trunk to be a bit thicker to justify the heavy foliage. So I'm just going to bring it further down, just like this. Again, go back to the artistic hearts brush. So we're going to have two trees here that are really going to be prominent. Again, we're still on the 3% size and 80% opacity. I haven't changed that. And again, maybe when it gets down to the lower parts of the tree, it just gets a bit sparser. We can go back to the airbrushing and the medium brush. Still on a small size, but perhaps even smaller would be suitable. Put it down to the 1%, create some branches. You're going to notice it especially in these more foreground ones. So if you're going to put branches anywhere, then these are the ones and the places that you should be putting them. And maybe just a hint of some small little twigs here that haven't got any foliage on them either. And likewise for this. Back to my foliage for the background trees. We're still on the 80%. Maybe I'll turn that down a little bit for the background ones to 70%. And I'll turn this back down to top end of 2% if they're distant trees. And I really need to start filling in those distance and middle distance trees now. I'm just going to add a few more trees for the background here. I've got some low-lying ones, but I just want to add a few more prominent ones even for the background. In fact, on the basis of the ones in the background, I'm going to go to that layer 5. I'm just going to go to my adjustments and Gaussian blur, and I'm just going to blur them in ever so slightly, just so they give the slight hint that they're further away and a little less in focus. You don't want to over egg this, so seriously, about between the 2 and the 3% is actually plenty. I'm almost considering 3% to be too much, so I'll probably leave it at the top end of 2%. So now I want to create another layer. I'm going to go back to my colours. I've got these two colours here, so we've got a lighter colour and a darker colour, slightly more bluey, but we're going to go for the lighter colour. And I'm just going to, with the soft airbrush on this the medium brush. Oh no, we'll go for the soft brush. 2% size, I'm going to lower the opacity to about 20%, which is still going to be quite impactful. And I just want to start bringing in some more highlights into this more foreground area. We can even turn the size of the brush up to 5%, fill in some areas if we need to, push it a little bit further. We can always then go back in with the darker colour of those two, which is the third one in for the left. Brush size back down to 2%, we're on 20% opacity. But I'm going to turn that up actually to 50%, and we're going to start creating some more shadowed bits perhaps in some of these purple areas, just anomalies here and there, not too much. And I'm also going to use the darker green colour that we had earlier. Again, 2% size, perhaps just around the base of the tree, start to create some broken textures and allow it to merge in, so the base of our trees has a place to exist. A little bit of a shadow area perhaps. So we can use a combination of the colours. So I'm going to use the darker colour and that lighter green colour. The lighter green colour, especially when it's on this slightly more distant point, I'm just going to go in there and just tweak, bring out some of the highlight on that top edge. Just be careful of the tree trunks. In fact, let's put it underneath our layer of the tree trunks. We can always create another one to create extra bits. So now it's underneath there, we don't have to worry too much. We can just do larger sweeping gestures. Makes our life a bit easier. Turn it back up again, just for some areas over here, perhaps where we don't have as much broken texture, but we want some highlight coming in. So that's back up at the 4%. Back in with a shadowy colour. And again, it's underneath where the trees were, and that's fine. So we'll put that down to 2%. It's still at the 50%, and we can just start adding in some more of these shadows bits. So around the tree trunks, really. Perhaps that's a little bit strong, so let's turn it down to 30% and 3% size. Just play around with it until you get the right kind of level for you. Just create some broken bits. You need to have some kind of shadow and break in the texture for the tree trunks to look like they actually are grounded. If they just sit on a flat area, they won't look like they actually belong. So we'll alternate between the dark and the light. So with the light colour, back down to the 2, just create some broken surface texture in and around where the tree trunk is. I'm going to go back to my sky layers now, because I feel like I really want to push that dramatically further. We've got the overall effect, but I think that the sky could be way more dramatic. That is the main point of this scene. So we're going to go back in there. So I'm going to go to the layer that I created for the sky, most recently layer 8, but I'm going to create another layer. Go back to my colours, I'm going to the second from the right. I'm still on the soft brush, so I'm going to put it up to about 8% size and have it at around 15% opacity. So that's relatively strong. So I'm just going to start bringing that in now. Light taps, I can always smooth it in, I can always blur it in, other things. I just want to start being a bit more dramatic. Narrow it down to about 4% if I want to just have a streak where I can intensify it a little bit, have it cut across. It's great now because it's showing through the silhouettes. We don't have to worry too much. We can always go to our previous layers, like layer 8, tap on the layer, and we can go to the adjustments and the bloom, and then just ramp up that bloom, and you'll see it just start to increase the glow. It's an easy way of creating intense drama out of the things you've already done. So we'll go to that layer 7, let's try the same, bloom, let's turn that up, and again, let's increase the drama without a great deal of real effort or concern. So we'll go to layer 6, adjustments, bloom, turn that up, because I'm going to create some more contrast now. So I'm going to go back to my top layer, which was layer 12, where I haven't done that to, but that's great. So we'll go to again the brightest colour, 4% size, and let's turn it up 20% opacity. And I can take the things that are already there and ramp them up, push them even further. Find a bit that's already looking bright and push it a little bit further still. We've got a really nice purple colour here, so perhaps we'll create another layer. Doesn't matter if there's lots of layers, this is now layer 13. You can see it's sandwiched between the different layers, it's underneath the trees, etc. So on this purple, we'll put it up to about 8% size, keep it at the 20% opacity, just bring in a hint of it here and there, not too much, just bringing in a hint, and I want to soften that, so I'm going to go to the Gaussian blur for that and just soften that in. So I don't want it to be too dramatic, but I want it to just have a little bit of an influence. So all I'm doing now is fine tuning. I'll go back to layer 12. I think I might even use the pure white, but I'm going to have to be very subtle with this. So I'm going to turn that really down to about 5% size and be more precise. So 3% size, 5% opacity rather. So I'm just going in, bringing out white where I want it to really glow. But I can go to my previous layers, like layer 6, maybe try duplicating it and see what it does. And that's actually quite a nice effect. So I'll show you with just one, now we've got 2. And maybe with that top layer, I can go to, again, Gaussian blur, and just blur that in so it spreads the effect a little bit. You can see with or without. I think with is good. And now we've got that layer, we can even duplicate that to create even more light in that scene. Pinch them together. Let's keep doing that. So duplicate it, it ramps up the light even further. It's a really great thing with digital is you can have an effect, and whereas if you're using canvas you might get a little bit timid, with digital you can really keep pushing it and you can see the impact of that now. Now if you think it's too much in some areas you can always go back in with the eraser. So eraser, soft brush, about 10% size, lower the opacity because I don't want to be too dramatic with this. It's about 10% again, and you can just remove bits of it if you want to soften that too. Bring some more of that dark and the stars through, however it suits. I'm going to go back down to layer 7, use my smudge tool on the soft brush, put it down to 5% size. It's on, well, let's leave it about 70% opacity. I'm just going to use that now to just create a slightly harder edge at the bottom of that green shape. I think it just needs a little bit more precision as it cuts through there. Maybe it can break all the way through in places. I don't mind that. Something like this. Some last details. I'm just going to go to top layer, create another layer. I'm going to use the brightest colour that I have on the bottom row, but I'm going to put it really low on the opacity, so about 4%, 2% on the brush size. And I'm just going to start picking out some highlights just here on the very top. Just some points that perhaps you get a ripple in the snow and it just really exaggerates the highlight a little bit, not too much. Anyway, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. If you have, make sure to tag me in any version that you've managed to come up with on Instagram or join my Facebook group and share it with me there. Hit the like button, the thumbs up button, it really helps my videos and my channel out generally, and I hope to catch you back here soon. See you later.